She was rinsing the last bowl when she heard him say it. Naomi's going to be like a bonus mom to you guys. You'll love her. Sonia's hand stayed under the water. Cold now. She hadn't noticed when it stopped being warm. Her daughter said okay, the way children say okay, when they don't understand the question but can feel something shifting in the room around them. Her son just stared at the tablet screen, quiet in the way 6-year-olds get quiet when the adults in the room are pretending too hard. Sonia turned off the faucet, dried her hands, folded the dish towel in half, then in half again, the way her mother had taught her something to do with her fingers so her face wouldn't say what her chest already knew. She walked to the doorway, stood there. Derek laughed at something Naomi said. Didn't look up. Sonia went back to the kitchen, sat down at the table, opened her laptop not to escape, not to distract, to think, the way she always thought best, quietly, without an audience. She didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, because some things deserve more than tears. They deserve a plan. Before we go any further, if this story's already sitting heavy on your chest, drop your country and the time where you're in the comments. I want to know who's watching. And if this is your first time on this channel, consider subscribing. There's a lot more where this came from. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Because what Derek didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined standing in that living room, was that the quiet woman in the kitchen was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. A wife? Nobody thought to ask about. There was a version of Sonia that Derek saw every day. The one who made breakfast at 6:15, who signed the school permission slips and remembered which teacher needed to be emailed by Friday, and knew exactly how her son liked his eggs, no pepper yolk, slightly runny toast on the side, not touching anything else. That version Derek had long since stopped finding interesting. What he never saw, what he never thought to look for, was what happened at 5 a.m. before the kids woke up. Before the eggs, before any of it. Sonia at the kitchen table, laptop open, reading a 70-page quarterly impact report the way other people read the news, annotating margins, cross-referencing numbers, a cup of coffee going cold beside her because she kept forgetting it was there. One morning he came downstairs early and caught her mid-page. "You and your little hobby projects?" he said, opening the fridge. Not unkind, just absent. The way you speak to furniture you've stopped seeing. Sonia closed the laptop, smiled, said nothing. That afternoon Patricia called. Sonia stepped out to the back porch, pulled the door shut behind her, and the woman who had just been quietly scrambling eggs became someone else entirely, voice low and precise, the kind of calm that doesn't come from peace but from absolute control. The Lagos disbursement clears Thursday. Make sure the second tranche is held until we have the audit confirmation. She was back inside in 4 minutes, refilled her coffee, asked her daughter what she wanted for lunch. Vivienne arrived that evening uninvited the way she always did, carrying a dish no one had asked for and an opinion no one wanted. She waited until Sonia was upstairs before pulling Derek to the corner of the kitchen. That woman never talks about her family. She said it low like a warning. A woman with no past is hiding a future you don't want to know about. Derek laughed it off. He always laughed it off. That night Sonia stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual, not checking her reflection, studying it, like she was taking inventory of something only she could measure. Then she reached over, turned off the light. 95 billion reasons to stay quiet. The office didn't exist on any directory. No sign on the door, no company name on the lease. Just a clean, quiet room on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown that Sonia had been coming to every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 years. 2 monitors, a wall map covered in colored pins, Lagos, Nairobi, Baltimore, Manila, Port-au-Prince. A whiteboard with numbers so large they looked theoretical until you understood they weren't. Patricia was already there when Sonia arrived, portfolio open, reading glasses on. The board wants a decision on the Nairobi hospital expansion by end of quarter, Patricia said without looking up. And we have a situation. She slid a folder across the table. Sonia opened it. Read the first page slowly, then the second. Mercer and Holloway, Patricia said. They've been lobbying 3 of our regional directors for the past 8 months, trying to get a seat at the table for the next funding cycle. Whoever lands this contract, she paused. We're talking exclusive advisory rights on a $95 billion portfolio. They want it badly. Sonia turned to the 3rd page. A list of names. The Mercer and Holloway team leading the campaign. 3rd name from the top. Derek Cox, Senior Vice President, Strategic Partnerships. She looked at it for a long moment, the kind of moment that has no sound in it. Then she reached out. turned the page face down on the table. Flat, deliberate. Decline their outreach, she said politely. Don't explain. Patricia studied her over the rim of her glasses. Didn't ask. She had worked with Sonia long enough to know that when she went quiet like that, still not empty, something was already in motion that hadn't been named yet. Sonia looked at the wall map, at the pins, at 6 years of work that existed because she had been careful enough, patient enough, invisible enough. She had known for years the silence was her sharpest asset. She just hadn't needed to use it like this before. $95 billion. Reasons to stay quiet. The office didn't exist on any directory. No sign on the door, no name on the lease agreement, no logo on the frosted glass. Just a clean, quiet room on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown that Sonia had been coming to every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 years, rain or shine school holidays, the week after her father's funeral, the morning after Derek first stayed out all night without calling. She came anyway. Because the work didn't pause for personal weather. 2 monitors on a standing desk. A wall map covered in colored pins. Lagos, Nairobi. Baltimore, Manila. Port-au-Prince, Accra, Kingston, Detroit. A whiteboard along the far wall with numbers so large they looked theoretical until you understood they weren't. Until you understood that each figure represented a school that now had running water, a clinic that could finally afford pediatric equipment, a community that had stopped losing its youngest people to diseases that cost $40 to treat. Sonia set her coffee on the desk, took off her coat, sat down. Patricia was already there the way Patricia was always already there. Portfolio open, reading glasses halfway down her nose, a stack of folders arranged in an order only she understood. 52 years old and still the sharpest person Sonia had ever put in a room. She didn't look up when Sonia walked in, just reached over and pushed a folder to the edge of the table without breaking her train of thought. The board wants a decision on the Nairobi hospital expansion by end of quarter, she said. Dr. Osei has the preliminary build cost at $68 million. I think he's being conservative and the real number is closer to 80. I've asked him to resubmit. Tell him we'll fund the higher number if the community governance structure is in place first, Sonia said, opening the folder. I'm not signing off on infrastructure that outlasts the people supposed to run it. Already noted. Patricia flipped a page. And we have a situation. There was something in the way she said it. Not alarmed, Patricia Wells did not do alarmed, but precise. The way a surgeon says there's a complication before they tell you what it is. She slid a second folder across the table. Sonia opened it. Read the first page without expression, then the second. Halfway through the third, she stopped, went back to the top, and read the whole thing again more slowly. A habit she had developed, young, her father's voice in her ear. The second read, is where you find what the first read didn't want you to see. Mercer and Holloway, Patricia said, watching her. They've been working 3 of our regional directors for the past 8 months. Quiet at first, just introductory calls, relationship building, the usual, but the last 2 months it's escalated. They've been positioning themselves for the next major funding cycle. Exclusive advisory rights. Sonia turned to the next page. Whoever lands this contract gets a seat at the table for every significant capital deployment we make over the next decade. Patricia continued. They've done the math. They know what that's worth. We're talking about advisory access to a $95 billion portfolio. Full visibility into global disbursement strategy. A pause. They want it very badly, Sonia. I can see that. She turned to the page with the names. The Mercer and Holloway team leading the outreach campaign. 7 people listed in descending order of seniority. Chairman Elliot Mercer at the top. Third name from the top. Derek Cox, Senior Vice President, Strategic Partnerships. She looked at it. The room was quiet, the way rooms get quiet when something significant is happening, and only one person in them knows it. The ventilation hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. Patricia's pen rested still against her portfolio. Sonia didn't move for a long moment. Then she reached out, turned the page face down on the table. Flat, deliberate. The way you cover something not because you can't bear to look at it, but because you've seen enough. Decline their outreach, she said. Her voice was the same as it had been 30 seconds ago. Calm, measured. A voice that had learned a long time ago that emotion and clarity were not the same thing and did not need to travel together. Politely, standard language, we're not accepting new advisory partnerships at this time. And if they push back, they will push back. Sonia picked up her coffee. Decline again. Still politely. Patricia studied her for a moment over the rim of her glasses. She had worked alongside Sonia for 9 years, had watched her navigate board disputes and international audits and a hostile takeover attempt that would have broken a lesser organization in 6 weeks. She knew what Sonia looked like when something surprised her. She knew what she looked like when something confirmed what she already suspected. This was the second one. She didn't ask. Patricia Wells had not stayed in Sonia's confidence for 9 years by asking questions whose answers weren't hers to have yet. "I'll draft the response this afternoon," she said simply and went back to her folder. Sonia turned to the wall map, let her eyes move across the pins, each one a decision she had made, a commitment she had kept a place in the world that was different because she had been disciplined enough, patient enough, invisible enough to do the work without needing anyone to know her name. Her father had built the foundation of this in near total anonymity for 30 years before he passed it to her. "The money is safest when no one knows where it lives," he used to say, "and you are safest when no one knows what you carry." She had married Derek 4 years into running the foundation, had watched him carefully in those early months, the way he treated strangers, the way he talked about people who had less than him, the way his eyes moved when a woman walked into a room. She had told herself she was being too analytical. That love required a different kind of seeing. She had been wrong, but she had not been careless. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad. Every asset held in trust under SC Holdings. Patricia had structured it so cleanly that not a single dollar of the foundation's endowment touched the surface of their shared life together. Derek had signed it without reading past the first paragraph, had laughed and said, "Baby, I'm not marrying you for the money," which had told her everything and nothing at the same time. She set down her coffee. Outside the window, the city moved the way it always moved, indifferent, continuous, unbothered by any individual story playing out inside it. Sonia watched it for a moment. Derek was on the 3rd floor of a building 6 blocks east of here, she knew. Sitting in a glass-walled office building, a campaign to win a contract from a woman whose name he called Baby, and whose eggs he ate every morning, and whose laptop he had glanced at last Tuesday and called a hobby. She had known for years that silence was her sharpest asset. She just hadn't needed to use it like this before. The Mistress moves in stages. It didn't happen all at once. That was the thing about Naomi Price. She was too smart for all at once. She moved in stages the way water moves into a house after a flood. Not through the front door, through the cracks. The small ones nobody thinks to seal because nobody imagines water finding them until it already has. Stage 1 was the school pickup. It was a Wednesday in October, 3 weeks after the tablet introduction in the living room. Sonia had a call running along a conference with the Manila team that had started at 2 and was still going at 3:45. She texted Derek running late, "Can you get the kids?" He replied 20 minutes later with a thumbs up, which she had learned years ago meant he had read the message and intended to comply and felt no particular way about it. What she hadn't expected, what she had no reason to expect, was for Derek to send Naomi instead. Her daughter told her at dinner. Matter of fact, the way 8-year-olds report things before they understand which details are supposed to matter. Naomi picked us up. She let Marcus sit in the front seat. "She smells like that perfume from the mall." Sonia cut her chicken, nodded. Said, "That's nice, baby." Didn't look up from her plate. Stage 2 was the barbecue. Derek's company held an annual fall gathering at the Riverside Park Pavilion. Spouses, children, the performance of a life going well. Sonia had attended every year for 6 years, standing beside Derek in whatever way the occasion required, shaking hands, remembering names, asking the right follow-up questions when she ran into people she had met the year before. This year, Naomi was there. Not beside Derek, smarter than that. She arrived with 2 other colleagues, laughed loudly at the right moments, played with the kids in a way that looked spontaneous, but had clearly been considered. She called Derek by his first name exactly as many times as everyone else did. She greeted Sonia with a warm smile and said, "I've heard so much about you," in a tone that meant the opposite. Vivian was also there. Of course she was. She found Sonia at the drinks table and leaned in close, the way she always did when she wanted her words to land without witnesses. "That young woman over there," she said, nodding toward Naomi without pointing. "She has energy." "A lot of people do," Sonia said. "Not like that." Vivian picked up a cup, looked out at the crowd. "Derek needs someone with that kind of energy, someone present. You know what I mean by present, Sonia." Sonia looked at her mother-in-law for a moment, at the deliberate set of her mouth, at the careful way she was watching for a reaction. "I do," Sonia said, picked up her own cup, walked away. That evening, Vivian called Derek. Sonia was upstairs giving her son a bath, but the house was old and the vents carried sound in ways Derek had never thought to account for. She didn't try to listen. She just heard. "Now that is a woman who knows her place," Vivian said. And then she laughed the warm, full laugh she reserved for things she genuinely meant. Derek laughed too. Sonia turned off the bath faucet, wrapped her son in his towel, pressed her lips to the top of his head and held them there 1 second longer than usual. Stage 3 was the question. It came on a Friday evening in November. Her daughter walked in from school, dropped her backpack by the door, the way she always did, kicked off her shoes in the wrong place the way she always did, and then stopped in the kitchen doorway with an expression Sonia recognized immediately as the look children get when they're carrying a sentence they're not sure they should deliver. "Mama." "Yeah, baby." A pause. "Daddy said Naomi is our bonus mom." She said it carefully, testing the weight of it in her mouth. "Is that true?" The spoon in Sonia's hand stopped moving. The pot on the stove kept simmering. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street. Sonia set the spoon down on the rest beside the stove, turned around, crouched to her daughter's level, looked at her, at this child who had her grandmother's eyes and her great-grandmother's mouth and who deserved above every other thing to never be used as a messenger between two adults who had stopped telling each other the truth. "You have one mom," Sonia said quietly, clearly. "You're looking at her." Her daughter nodded, seemed satisfied with that, the uncomplicated satisfaction of a child who just needed the answer to be simple and true. She picked up her backpack and headed for the stairs. Sonia stayed crouched for a moment after she left. Then she stood, turned the stove down to low, walked to the small table by the window where she kept her phone and picked it up. Scrolled to Patricia's name. It was 11 minutes past 7. Patricia answered on the second ring. Sonia. She didn't give a speech, didn't lay out the evidence or explain the timeline or rehearse the case she had been quietly building in the back of her mind for months. She just said one word, the only word that mattered now, the word that meant the waiting was over and the next chapter had a different set of rules. "Patricia." A breath. "It's time." A brief silence on the other end. Then Patricia said, "I'll have everything ready by Monday." The way someone says it when they have already had everything ready for quite some time and were simply waiting to be told. Sonia hung up, went back to the stove, stirred the pot. Dinner was on the table by 7:30. The kids ate. Derek came home at 8, kissed the top of both children's heads, reheated his plate, sat at the table scrolling his phone. He didn't notice anything different about her. He never had. What the prenup already knew. Patricia Wells did not do clutter. Her office was the kind of space that told you everything about the person who worked in it. Clean lines, nothing on the desk that didn't have a purpose, files arranged in a system so precise it looked architectural. 2 framed certificates on the wall. 1 photograph on the windowsill, her mother, her daughter, a beach somewhere warm. Everything else was work. Sonia sat across from her on Monday morning with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup and listened to the woman she trusted most in the world lay out in careful, measured language exactly how protected she already was. C&C Holdings Trust. Patricia began opening the first folder. Established 11 years ago, 13 months before you were married. Every asset belonging to the foundation, the endowment, the real estate holdings, the international disbursement accounts, the IP portfolio sits inside this structure. None of it is marital property. None of it was ever marital property. Derek Cox has no legal claim to any of it, and the prenuptial agreement he signed before the wedding makes that position airtight. She slid the prenup across the desk. Sonia didn't pick it up. She had read it so many times she could have recited sections of it from memory. "He signed it," Sonia said, not a question. "He signed it," Patricia confirmed. Page 1, line 4, his signature's right there. He initialed every exhibit. The notarization is clean. His own attorney at the time, a man named Gerald Fitch, who I understand has since retired to Scottsdale, reviewed it and raised no objections. A pause. Gerald Fitch was not a family law specialist. Derek hired him because he was cheap and available on short notice. I know this because I looked him up in 2017 just to be sure. Sonia almost smiled. "You never told me that." "You didn't need to know it then." Patricia folded her hands. "You need to know it now." She walked Sonia through the rest of it methodically, the way she did everything one careful step at a time, never skipping ahead, never assuming the person across from her had already made the leap she was about to make. The marital assets were modest by comparison. The house, which was in both names and would be subject to division. 2 joint accounts. Derek's pension, which had accrued over 14 years at Mercer and Halloway. A car in his name, a car in hers. "He will want the house," Patricia said. He can have it, Sonia said. Patricia looked at her over her glasses. Sonia, the house is worth— I know what it's worth. She set down her coffee cup. I also know that my children have grown up in it, and that pulling them out of it in the middle of all this is not something I'm willing to do. He can have the house. I want residential custody, and I want the kids' schools to stay the same. A beat. Patricia wrote something down. He won't fight you on custody, she said, not looking up. He won't want the visibility of a contested custody case when the financial picture becomes clear. Trust me on that. I do, Sonia said, on everything. Patricia reached for the second folder. Inside was a document Sonia had signed 3 months ago, a limited power of attorney, authorizing Patricia to initiate divorce proceedings on her behalf at a time of Sonia's choosing. She had prepared it quietly, told no one filed it in the same locked drawer where she kept her father's letters and her children's birth certificates. I'll file Tuesday, Patricia said. Service will be arranged for Thursday. I've spoken to a process server who is discreet and professional. The way she said discreet and professional made clear she had thought carefully about exactly how and where Derek would be served and had chosen to arrange maximum effect with minimum spectacle. Or perhaps the reverse. With Patricia, it was sometimes hard to tell. Where? Sonia asked. His office, Patricia said simply. Then, after a pause, during the 10 o'clock team meeting. Sonia looked at her. Patricia did not look away. You said it was time, she said. I'm taking you at your word. That same afternoon, 6 blocks east and 3 floors up, Derek Cox sat in a glass-walled conference room, listening to Chairman Elliot Mercer deliver what had become a familiar speech, the Sable Foundation. $95 billion under management, the single most significant philanthropic portfolio in the Western Hemisphere. 2 years of outreach, 3 regional directors contacted 0 responses. 0. They're not ignoring us. Mercer said the way men say things when they want to believe the more flattering interpretation. They're being selective. We just need to find the right angle, the right relationship. Derek nodded along with everyone else. He had heard versions of this speech 8 times in the past 18 months, had contributed ideas in 4 of those meetings, suggested approaches, offered contacts, drafted outreach language that went nowhere. The foundation was famously opaque. Nobody knew who ran it. Nobody knew how decisions were made. The public-facing board was a rotating group of regional directors who said very little and committed to nothing. Whoever was at the center of it, whatever name sat at the top of that structure, had made themselves effectively invisible. We need to be in the room, Mercer said. When the annual gala comes around in the spring, I want us represented. I want relationships. I want a face they recognize. Derek thought about the gala, the way he thought about most things at work lately, with the surface of his mind, while the rest of it was somewhere else. He was distracted. Had been for weeks. Something about the way Sonia had looked at him lately, or rather the way she hadn't looked at him. Like he had become part of the background of her life. Furniture she had stopped seeing. He told himself it didn't bother him. He told himself a lot of things. After the meeting, he went back to his office, sat down, looked out at the city for a moment and tried to locate the feeling that had been sitting in his chest for the past month without a name. His phone buzzed. Naomi. A message with a photograph attached and a caption that was meant to be playful. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he put the phone face down on the desk. The papers were ready. They had been ready for 3 months. Sonia had simply been waiting for the right moment and the right witness. Thursday was going to be a very specific kind of morning for Derek Cox. He just didn't know it yet. Naomi's other game Thursday came the way Patricia had arranged it, clean, precise, irreversible. The process server arrived at Mercer and Holloway at 9:58. A professional man in a plain gray suit carrying a manila envelope who spoke to the receptionist briefly and was directed to the conference room on the 23rd floor where the 10 o'clock strategic partnerships meeting was already assembling. He waited by the door. When Derek Cox walked in at 9:59, the man said his name once clearly and placed the envelope in his hand before anyone in the room had time to process what they were watching. Derek looked down at the envelope, looked up. The man was already walking back toward the elevator. The room was very quiet for approximately 4 seconds, which is a long time when 11 people are watching you hold something you clearly weren't expecting. Then someone coughed. Someone else opened a laptop. The meeting began as though nothing had happened because that was the professional thing to do, and everyone in that room was a professional. Derek sat through 40 minutes of it with the envelope on the table in front of him, unopened, before he stood and excused himself. He called Sonia from the stairwell. She didn't answer. He called twice more. Then he called the number he had for Patricia Wells, a number he had dialed exactly once before 2 years ago, when Sonia had been in a minor car accident and he couldn't reach her directly. Patricia answered on the third ring. "Mr. Cox, I need to speak to Sonia. All communication regarding this matter goes through me now," Patricia said. Her voice was courteous, the way a locked door is courteous. It doesn't yell at you. It simply doesn't open. "You'll want to retain counsel as soon as possible. I'd recommend someone with family law experience. If you need referrals, I can have my assistant send a list." "Patricia, I'll be in touch, Mr. Cox. Have a good afternoon." The line went dead. Derek stood in the stairwell for a long time. The envelope was in his hand. He had opened it somewhere between the conference room and the stairwell door, had read the first page standing in the hallway, which was not a dignified place to read divorce papers, but dignity had stopped being available the moment the gray-suited man said his name. He went back upstairs, collected his jacket, told his assistant he had a personal matter, and left the building. He drove home. The house was empty. Sonia's car was gone. The kids were at school. He walked through the rooms in a way he hadn't walked through them in years, slowly actually looking. At the photographs on the staircase wall, at the small ceramic bowl by the front door where Sonia kept her keys, at the kitchen table where she sat every morning before the rest of the house, woke up laptop open, reading things he had never once asked about. There was a drawing on the refrigerator. His son's handwriting in green crayon at the bottom, "Mom is always there." He stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes, then he drove back to the office. What happened next? Derek did not see coming, though in retrospect the signs had been there for months in the way signs always are hiding in plain sight, behind the thing you were too distracted to look directly at. The internal IT security report landed on Chairman Mercer's desk that same afternoon. It had been generated 3 weeks earlier, flagged by the company's data monitoring system, and quietly investigated before anyone in senior leadership was informed. Standard procedure, the kind of thing that happened in large financial firms with some regularity and usually amounted to nothing. This one amounted to something. Naomi Price, Senior Associate Strategic Partnerships, had accessed a restricted internal database on 6 separate occasions over a period of 4 months. The database contained Mercer and Halloway's entire strategic approach to the Sable Foundation outreach, contact names, proposed fee structures, internal assessments of the Foundation's decision-making process, confidential notes from the 3 regional directors they had cultivated. She had not accessed it as part of any assigned project. There was no authorization on record. No supervisor had requested the access. She had gone in alone after hours from her personal work terminal. That would have been serious enough on its own. But the monitoring system had also captured outgoing communications. On 2 occasions, Naomi had sent emails from a personal account, not her company account, a private Gmail address, with a variation of her name to a contact address listed in the database as External Inquiry, Sable Foundation Regional Office. The emails were professional in tone, articulate. They introduced her by name, referenced her expertise in philanthropic portfolio management, and expressed interest in exploring a direct advisory relationship. She had signed them with her own name, not Mercer and Halloway's name, her own. She had been trying to cut in front of the company she worked for. To use the intelligence Mercer and Halloway had spent 2 years gathering to land a personal contract with the Foundation before anyone else got there, a private arrangement, a side door. Mercer called Derek into his office at 4:15. He slid the report across the desk without preamble. Derek read it standing up, read it again. His jaw tightened somewhere around page 2 and did not loosen. "She used our research," Mercer said, quiet, controlled. The quietness of a man who has been building companies for 40 years and learned that rage is most effective when it takes up no space. "She used our contacts, our analysis, our relationship capital, and she tried to walk through the door we built for herself, alone." Derek set the report down. "When," he said, "we're terminating her contract this afternoon. Security will escort her out at 5. Mercer looked at him steadily. "I understand there may be a personal dimension to this situation, Derek. I'm not going to address that directly. What I will say is that I expect this to have no further impact on your work or your presence in this office." It was the most pointed non-statement Derek had ever received from a superior. It landed exactly as intended. He went back to his office, sat down, did not reach for his phone. For the first time in 14 months, he did not immediately reach for his phone to call Naomi when something went wrong. He sat in that chair for a long time after Mercer left, watching the city outside his window, thinking about the envelope on the table, about the drawing on the refrigerator, About a woman he had lived beside for 6 years and spoken to every day, and somehow in all of that time had never actually seen. He picked up his phone eventually, not to call Naomi, to call his brother, because he needed to talk to someone who had known him before he became the version of himself that had made all of these decisions, and he needed that person to tell him honestly what they saw. His brother picked up, said his name, said what's going on. Derek opened his mouth, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't have an answer that made him sound like someone he respected. The things children remember. Sonia had rented the apartment 3 months before she filed. Patricia had suggested it quietly, practically the way she suggested everything. You'll want somewhere to go that's already yours when the time comes. Somewhere that doesn't feel like a transition. Somewhere the children can walk into and immediately feel as home. Sonia had found it on a Sunday afternoon in August while Derek was at a golf thing and the kids were at her sister's. 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with good light, and a window above the sink that looked out onto a row of oak trees that were still green then and would be gold by the time she moved in. She had furnished it slowly. A chair here, a lamp there. Nothing dramatic, nothing that announced itself. Just the quiet accumulation of a space becoming livable the way Sonia did most things. The kids had been there for 2 weeks now. They had adapted the way children adapt when the adults around them are honest, without being heavy quickly and completely with occasional unexpected questions, and then long stretches of just being children who needed dinner and homework help and someone to argue with about screen time. Her daughter had claimed the bedroom with the better closet immediately and without discussion. Her son had arranged his stuffed animals on the windowsill in a specific order he explained to Sonia in great detail, and then rearranged entirely the following morning. Life, in other words. Continuing. The drawing came home on a Tuesday. Her son's teacher, a young woman named Ms. Aldridge, who sent thoughtful weekly updates and remembered that Marcus didn't like his fruit. Touching his crackers, had assigned the class a family portrait project. Draw your family. Label everyone. Use your favorite colors. Marcus had used green for everything. Green was his favorite color in a way that brooked no argument. He had been clear about this since age 3 and showed no signs of reconsidering. He came through the apartment door that afternoon and went straight to the kitchen the way he always did, because the kitchen was where Sonia was at 4 o'clock, without exception preparing something or reading something or doing both simultaneously. He dropped his backpack, pulled a folded piece of paper from the front pocket, held it out to her. She unfolded it. 5 figures in green crayon, various heights. The tallest one on the left had a label above its head in careful oversized letters, Mom. Next to her, me. Then his sister. Then slightly apart from the group, a smaller figure, Dad. Sonia studied it. 5 figures. She counted again. Baby, she said. Who's the 5th one? Marcus looked at the drawing, then back at her with the particular expression of a 6-year-old who finds certain adult questions genuinely puzzling. That's Grandma Celestine, he said, from the picture in the hallway. Her grandmother, who had been gone for 11 years. She's family, Marcus said with complete authority. Then he picked up his backpack and headed for his room. Sonia stood at the kitchen counter holding a green crayon drawing for a long moment. Then she folded it carefully along its original creases, opened the drawer beside the stove where she kept important things, school calendars, pediatric appointment cards, her father's watch that she couldn't bring herself to put anywhere she couldn't reach it easily. She put the drawing in the drawer, closed it. Ms. Aldrich had also written a note. It was clipped to the back of the drawing, which Sonia discovered later that evening. A small square of paper in a teacher's neat, rounded handwriting. Marcus shared something lovely during our sharing circle today. When I asked him to tell us about his picture, he pointed to the figure labeled Mom and said, "She's always there. Even when she's doing her work, she's always there. I wanted you to know." Ms. Asonia read it at the kitchen table after the kids were asleep. Read it twice. Then she set it face down on the table the same way she had set down the folder with Derek's name in it, not because it was too much to look at, but because some things you have to stop looking at before you can actually feel them. She sat with it for a while. Derek came on Saturday for his scheduled time with the kids. Patricia had arranged a temporary visitation schedule pending the formal custody agreement. Derek had Saturdays, alternating Sundays, and 1 weeknight dinner. He arrived at 10, which was the agreed time, and stood in the apartment doorway with the slightly displaced expression of a man who was not yet comfortable with the geometry of this new arrangement, the fact that he had to knock now and wait and be let in. Sonia let him in, stepped back. He looked around the apartment briefly, not rudely, just the involuntary looking of someone encountering a space for the first time that contains a life they used to be adjacent to. The oak tree light through the kitchen window, The ceramic bowl by the door, same as the one at the house for keys. The drawing on the refrigerator in green crayon. He stopped at the drawing. Sonia watched him read it, watched him look at the 5 figures, watched something move across his face that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite guilt, and was probably both of those things pressed together into something that didn't have a clean name yet. The kids came running from the back bedroom, then the thunder of them shoes already on Marcus announcing that he wanted pancakes, and his sister announcing that they were not having pancakes. They were going to the park, and Marcus saying pancakes. And Derek's face shifted into something softer and more certain, the thing he had always been best at, which was being their father, which was the one role he had never mislaid. He crouched down, opened his arms. They hit him like weather. Sonia watched from the kitchen doorway. He looked up at her over their heads, and for the first time in longer than she could accurately calculate, he looked at her, actually looked the way he hadn't in years. Not through her, not past her, at her. She held his gaze for exactly 1 moment, then she picked up her keys from the ceramic bowl. "Have them back by 6, she said quietly, clearly. "Marcus needs a bath before bed and Amara has a spelling test Monday." She walked to the door, held it open. He stood, nodded, gathered the children toward the hallway with a hand on each of their backs. At the threshold he paused, turned slightly, like he was considering saying something. Sonia waited. He didn't say it. She closed the door behind them and stood in the sudden quiet of the apartment, the particular silence of a space that has children in it constantly, and then all at once doesn't. She stood in it for a moment, let it be what it was, then she went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, opened her laptop. She didn't hate him. That was the part that still surprised her sometimes, arriving without warning in quiet moments like this one. She had expected to, or at least expected something sharper than what was actually there. But what she felt when she felt anything at all toward Derek Cox was something closer to the particular sadness of outgrowing a place you once loved. Not anger at the place, just the clear-eyed recognition that you had changed in ways it could no longer hold. She had simply outgrown the version of him she had once believed in, and she was done making herself smaller to fit back inside it. Served, the gala invitation arrived at Mercer and Halloway on a Wednesday morning in late February. Chairman Mercer's assistant brought it to him personally, a heavy cream envelope with the Sable Foundation seal embossed on the back, the kind of physical mail that organizations send when they want you to understand that what's inside matters. Mercer opened it at his desk, read it twice, and then called his senior leadership team into the conference room within the hour. "We're in," he said, holding the card up. "The Sable Foundation Annual Gala, March 15th, black tie. They've extended an invitation to Mercer and Halloway for the first time in the Foundation's history." He set the card down, looked around the table. "This is the room we have been trying to get into for 2 years. I don't need to tell anyone here what that means." The room understood what it meant. Derek understood what it meant. He looked at the invitation from his seat at the table at the Sable Foundation, name on the card, at the date, at the address of the venue. A ballroom at the Langham, the 15th, 3 weeks away. He told himself this was the break he had been working toward. That showing up, being visible, making the right impression on whoever ran that foundation, this was how the last several months of professional turbulence resolved itself into something that made sense. A contract this size would cement his position at the firm, would answer quietly and permanently every question his judgment had raised since the divorce papers and the IT report, and the afternoon Mercer had looked at him across a desk and said things without saying them. He told himself this was momentum returning. He went home that evening to the house which he had rattled around in alone for the past 6 weeks, in a way he hadn't anticipated. He had wanted the house. Patricia had been right about that. But wanting a thing and knowing what to do with it once you have it turned out to be different problems. He made dinner, ate it standing at the counter because sitting at the table alone felt like a statement he wasn't ready to make. Looked at the space where the ceramic bowl used to be by the front door Sonia had taken it, which he had noticed immediately, and said nothing about, which seemed to summarize something he couldn't articulate. He went to bed at 10, lay awake until after midnight. The custody exchange on Saturday went the way the last several had gone: functional, civil, the particular careful politeness of 2 people who have lawyers and mean to keep it that way. Derek picked up the kids at 10. Sonia held the door. They did not speak beyond the necessary. He brought them back at 6. Marcus had a green stain on his shirt from something he described at length and with great enthusiasm. Amar had strong opinions about where they should go for dinner next Saturday, which she delivered as a formal proposal. Derek listened to both of them on the drive home. At the door of the apartment, handing them back, he looked at Sonia for a moment. "The gala," he said. She looked at him. "The Sable Foundation Gala, March 15th. He said it the way people say things when they're not entirely sure why they're saying them. "Mercer and Holloway received an invitation. I'll be there representing the firm." Sonia held his gaze. "Okay," she said. Not a question, not a warning. Just the single flat syllable of a woman receiving information she already had. He nodded. The kids moved past him into the apartment. He stood in the hallway for one moment longer than necessary. Then he left. Inside the apartment after the door closed, Sonia stood in the kitchen with her back to the counter. She had known about the invitation. Patricia had told her Tuesday the Foundation's events coordinator had confirmed the Mercer and Holloway RSVP that morning. It was the detail Sonia had been waiting for, the one that confirmed the geometry of what was about to happen. Derek in that ballroom. Chairman Mercer in that ballroom. And Sonia Cox, executive director of the Sable Foundation, standing at the center of it. She picked up her phone, called Patricia. "He told me," she said. "I know," Patricia said. "The RSVP has him listed as the firm's primary representative." "Good," Sonia said. A pause. Then Patricia carefully, "Are you sure about this?" Sonia looked out the kitchen window at the oak trees. They were beginning to bud the very first suggestion of green at the tips of the branches, the way spring starts before it commits. "My father used to say," she said slowly, "that the truth doesn't need to be announced. It just needs to be present, and eventually the room catches up to it." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Your father," she said, "was a very wise man." "He was," Sonia said. "Make sure my seat is at the head table." The weeks between the invitation and the gala moved the way weeks move, when something is coming that can't be undone faster than you expect, and with a strange quality of inevitability that makes the ordinary days around it feel slightly unreal. Derek prepared for the gala the way he prepared for high-stakes client events. Suit-selected talking points considered the careful construction of a version of himself that read as confident without being aggressive, knowledgeable without being presumptuous. He had his hair cut on the 14th, pressed his shirt himself because the dry cleaner had let him down once, and he had never fully recovered from the professional anxiety of it. He arrived at the Langham at 7:15. The ballroom was already filling. He checked in at the registration table, received his place card, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray. The room was extraordinary, the kind of assembled company that made you immediately and quietly recalibrate every assumption you had carried through the door. Heads of government agencies, international foundation directors, economists whose names he recognized from publications he had read in graduate school. The quiet, gravitational weight of people for whom this work was not ambition but vocation. He found Mercer near the entrance, shook hands, exchanged the expected words. Mercer was in good spirits, expansive, confident, the version of himself that emerged at moments like this when he felt the room was finally going the right direction. "Tonight's the night," Mercer said, surveying the room. "Find the right conversation. Build something real. This is what 2 years of work looks like when it pays off." Derek nodded, held his champagne, let his eyes move across the room, and then he saw her, Sonia, standing near the far end of the room beside a tall arrangement of white flowers in a black dress that was so unassumingly elegant it took him a full 3 seconds to process what he was seeing. Her hair was the same, close-cropped clean, but there was something different about the way she occupied the space around her. Or perhaps the space itself was different. Perhaps the room was responding to her in a way rooms had always responded to her, and he had simply never been in a room where he could see it clearly. She was speaking to a group of 5 people who were all in various ways leaning toward her. Not dramatically, just the small, constant lean of people who want to be closer to the source of something. Derek stood very still. Chairman Mercer saw her at the same moment. Derek felt him shift beside him, felt the subtle change in his posture, the way his attention reorganized itself. And then Mercer was moving, crossing the room with the purposeful ease of a man who has finally spotted the person he came to find. Sonia saw him coming. She excused herself from her group with a smile and turned to receive him. Mercer extended his hand. "Ms. Cox," he said, and his voice carried the particular quality of a man addressing someone he has wanted to meet for a very long time and is finally genuinely in the presence of. "Executive Director of the Sable Foundation. It is an honor. We have been trying to reach you for 2 years." Sonia shook his hand. "Chairman Mercer," she said, "I've heard wonderful things about your firm." She said it warmly, professionally, without irony, without even a flicker of anything that wasn't perfectly serenely appropriate. Then she looked past his shoulder. Derek was standing 8 feet away, champagne glass in hand, completely still. She looked at him the way she had looked at him at the apartment door. Not with triumph, not with anger, with the steady, untroubled gaze of a woman who had known this moment was coming and had arranged herself accordingly. She held it for 1 second. Then she returned her attention to Mercer and continued the conversation, as though the world had not just rearranged itself entirely because for her it hadn't. This was simply the room catching up to the truth. He stood in that ballroom for 20 minutes after it happened, champagne going warm in his hand, the sound of the room moving around him like water. $95 billion. Mercer had said the number 100 times in the past 2 years, had put it on slide decks and in memos and in speeches delivered to rooms full of people whose entire professional identity was organized around numbers of that scale. He had never once, not one single time, connected it to the woman who packed his children's lunches every morning, who folded dish towels in half twice and read quarterly reports before anyone else was awake and stepped out to the back porch to take calls in a voice she never used inside the house. He had called it a hobby. He had stood in their kitchen and called it a hobby. He set his champagne glass down on a passing tray, walked to the coat check, collected his jacket, walked out of the Langham into the night air, which was cold and indifferent and exactly what he needed. He stood on the sidewalk for a while. The doors behind him opened and closed. Music drifted out each time. Inside, in a ballroom full of the most consequential people in his professional world, his soon-to-be ex-wife was in her element, quietly, completely, without performance or announcement. She had always been in her element. He just hadn't known what her element was. The morning after the room caught up. Derek did not sleep that night. He drove home from the Langham on automatic hands, on the wheel, eyes on the road, the city moving past him in its usual indifferent way. He parked in the driveway, sat in the car for a while with the engine off. The house was dark. It was always dark now when he came home, which he still hadn't entirely adjusted to the absence of interior light as a signal that someone was home and had been home and had thought to turn things on. He went inside, poured 2 fingers of bourbon he didn't drink, sat at the kitchen table. The ceramic bowl was still not there by the front door. He looked at the space where it used to be for a long time. The following morning, Chairman Mercer called him at 8:45. Derek had been up since 5, had showered, dressed, made coffee, sat with it, had done the math in his head approximately 40 times since the previous night, arriving at the same answer, each time an answer so simple it was almost offensive in its simplicity. The woman his company had spent 2 years trying to reach had been married to him. For 6 of those years, had eaten breakfast across from him. Every morning had driven the same route to school. Pickup had folded laundry in the room next to his home office while he sat on calls discussing strategy for approaching her foundation. The same foundation. His phone rang. He picked up. Derek. Mercer's voice was measured. Not cold. Mercer was rarely cold, but precise in the way it got, when he was working through something that required care. I had a long conversation with Miss Cox last night after you left. Derek said nothing, waited. She's extraordinary, Mercer said, and there was something in it that wasn't just professional admiration. There was a kind of rueful quality, the tone of a man recalibrating something he thought he had already calculated correctly. The Foundation's work over the last decade, the scope of it, the structure, the impact metrics, it's unlike anything I've encountered in this space. A pause. She built most of it herself. Did you know that? No, Derek said. Which was true, and also he understood now, was one of the most clarifying true statements he had ever made. She's agreed to an exploratory conversation about an advisory relationship, Mercer continued. Nothing committed, but she's willing to talk. Another pause, longer this time. I want you to know, Derek, that I'm aware of the personal situation. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What I will say is that Ms. Cox was entirely professional last night. Entirely. Whatever is happening between you personally, she separated it completely from the professional conversation. I found that he seemed to search for the right word. Remarkable. Derek looked at the kitchen table. She's remarkable, he said. Which was also true. Which was perhaps the truest thing he had said about Sonia Cox in 6 years of marriage. And he was saying it now in an empty house to her former target client, the morning after her foundation's annual gala. The meeting is next Thursday, Mercer said. I'd like you in the room. A long silence. I don't think that's appropriate, Derek said. Mercer considered this. No, he said finally. You're probably right. And then, take the day if you need it, Derek. We'll debrief properly on Monday. The line went quiet. The divorce proceedings had been moving through the system with the efficiency Patricia Wells brought to everything she touched, methodical, well-documented, impervious to delay. The final hearing was scheduled for the second Thursday of April, 8 weeks after the gala. Derek had retained an attorney, a competent man named Howard Briggs, who had reviewed the prenuptial agreement in its entirety and delivered his assessment with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned to present bad news as information rather than judgment. "The prenup is enforceable," Howard said at their third meeting. "I've reviewed it thoroughly and there is no basis for challenge. Every asset held under SC Holdings Trust predates the marriage and was properly disclosed at signing. The marital estate is limited to the jointly held property and the accounts we've already identified." Derek had listened to this without expression. "What about the house?" "She's not contesting it," Howard said. "She's willing to sign her interest over to you in exchange for the custody arrangement and the kids' school continuity." He looked at his notes. "Frankly, Derek, given the asset disparity here, the terms she's offering are unusually generous." Derek had thought about that word for days afterward. Generous. Sonia, with $95 billion in a trust that he couldn't touch, was giving him the house. Not because she needed to, not because Howard had negotiated it, because the children had grown up there and she didn't want to uproot them further, and she had decided in her characteristic way that it was the right thing to do. She had always done the right thing. He just hadn't been paying attention to what that looked like. The final hearing was on a Thursday morning at 9 o'clock in a courtroom on the fourth floor of the family court building downtown. The room was smaller than Derek had imagined, wood paneling, fluorescent lighting, the particular bureaucratic quietness of a place where significant things are processed at a steady, practiced pace. He sat at one table, Howard beside him. Sonia sat at the other, Patricia beside her leather portfolio, open pen in hand. Derek looked at Sonia once when he walked in. She was reading something, a document, not her phone. She looked up, briefly acknowledged him with a small nod, looked back down, the same nod she had given him across the ballroom, the same one she had given him at apartment doorways and custody exchanges, the nod of a woman who had decided exactly how much of herself to offer each situation and was at peace with the allocation. The judge was a woman in her 60s with silver-framed glasses who moved through the proceedings with the economy of someone who had done this thousands of times and understood that efficiency was its own form of dignity. She reviewed the agreement, confirmed both parties had independent legal representation, confirmed the prenuptial agreement had been independently reviewed and was not being contested. Then the court clerk read the asset schedule into the record. Standard marital assets first, the house, the joint accounts, the pension, the vehicles. Then the trust disclosure, which was required by law even when the assets were entirely protected and not subject to division. SC Holdings Trust. The clerk read. Her voice was practiced and neutral, the voice of a person reading numbers the way a weather forecaster reads temperatures factually without editorial. Current assessed value $95.4 billion. The room was not large. The sound did not have far to travel. Howard made a small sound beside Derek, not quite a breath, not quite a word. Something in between, quickly suppressed. The judge's expression did not change. Patricia's pen moved steadily across her portfolio. Sonia sat with her hands folded on the table. Derek looked at the wood grain of the surface in front of him. $95.4 billion. Said out loud in a room by a person whose job was to say true things into the official record. He had known the number for 2 years, had put it in slide decks, had built entire strategic frameworks around it, had said it in meetings the way you say the name of a mountain you are planning to climb, with the distant aspirational quality of something enormous and not yet real. It was real now. It had always been real. It had been real on Tuesday mornings and Thursday mornings in a quiet office on the 14th floor of a building 6 blocks from his own. It had been real at 5 a.m. at the kitchen table with a laptop and a cup of coffee going cold. It had been real when she stepped out to the back porch and changed her voice and spoke about Lagos disbursements and audit confirmations. It had been real every single day of their marriage. He had just called it a hobby. The judge asked both parties to confirm their agreement to the terms. Howard confirmed on his behalf. Patricia on Sonia's. The gavel came down. Derek looked up. Sonia was already gathering her things, unhurried, deliberate, the way she did everything. She said something quietly to Patricia, who nodded and made a note. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair, folded it over her arm. At the door she paused, turned back the way she almost never did. She looked at Derek across the room, across the 2 tables, and the distance of everything that had happened and everything that hadn't, and for a moment her expression was simply human. Not triumphant, not cold. Just the face of a person at the end of something long, looking at the person they had traveled it with and feeling the particular weight of an ending that is also in its way a kind of release. She nodded once, then she walked through the door. Patricia followed without looking back. Derek sat in the chair for a long time after the room emptied. Howard said something he didn't register. Eventually, Howard stopped saying things and sat with him in the professional silence of a man who has learned when to let a client simply be where they are. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere down the hall, another door opened and closed. The thing about building your whole identity around a woman you underestimated? Derek understood this now, sitting in that small courtroom with its wood paneling and its institutional quiet, is that when she leaves, she doesn't just take herself. She takes the ceiling, the invisible upper limit of what you thought your life was reaching toward. And you are left in a room that is exactly the size you always were, without the borrowed altitude you never knew you were standing on. What collapses without warning? Naomi Price left quietly. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward, how little noise it made. No confrontation, no scene, no final phone call, with recriminations and slammed doors. Just a box of personal items left at the Mercer and Holloway security desk. On a Friday afternoon, a building access card returned in an envelope with her name written on the outside, in her own handwriting, and then nothing. A presence that had organized itself around usefulness and proximity to power, and when both of those things evaporated, found no remaining reason to stay in the vicinity. Derek found out she had left the city entirely from a mutual acquaintance 3 weeks after the termination. She had taken a position at a firm in Atlanta. No forwarding message, no explanation. The relationship such as it had been, which Derek was now understanding, had been considerably less than he thought ended the way it had, in some sense always been structured to end transactionally without sentiment, when the transaction no longer made sense. He had called her once in the days immediately after the gala from the driveway of the house at 11 o'clock at night. She had answered. He had started to say something he wasn't sure what exactly, some version of "I need to understand what this was." And she had said very calmly, "Derek, I think we both know this ran its course." And then she had said goodnight. And that had been that. He sat with the flatness of it for a long time. Not grief exactly. Something more like the particular deflation of discovering that what you thought was a door was a wall painted to look like one. That the thing you had walked toward with such certainty had no interior. Had never had one. Vivian called on a Sunday morning 3 weeks after the gala. Derek was in the backyard when his phone rang, standing in the part of the yard that got morning sun, drinking coffee, doing the thing he had started doing on weekend mornings when the kids weren't there, which was simply standing outside and being quiet and trying to locate himself in the silence. It was not a comfortable exercise. He was getting better at it. He answered. "I read about the foundation," Vivian said without preamble. She had seen something online, a recap of the gala in a philanthropy trade publication that had mentioned Sonia by name, described her as the foundation's founding executive director, noted the $95 billion endowment with the matter-of-fact brevity of a publication whose readers were not surprised by numbers of that scale. Vivian had clearly been surprised. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I didn't know," Derek said. A silence. "You didn't," she stopped. Started again. "Derek, you were married to that woman for 6 years. I know how long I was married to her, Mama, and you didn't know." Not accusatory, now something else. Something closer to the genuine bewilderment of a woman confronting information that didn't fit the story she had been telling herself. Vivian had spent 6 years cataloging Sonia's insufficiencies, her quietness, her privacy, her refusal to perform the version of daughter-in-law that Vivian had written for her, had called her secretive, unknowable, suspicious, had said more than once that a woman with no past was hiding a future you didn't want to know about. Vivian had been right in a way. She simply hadn't understood the kind of future she was describing. She was always, Vivian started. "Mama." Derek said it gently, more gently than he felt capable of, which surprised him. "I'm going to stop you there." A pause. "She was always exactly what she was," he said. "We just didn't look." He heard his mother breathe. The particular sound of someone receiving something they had not been prepared to receive and not yet knowing whether to accept it or deflect it. She didn't say anything else for a long moment. Then quietly, "How are the children?" "They're good," Derek said. "They're really good." "And Sonia, does she—" a careful pause. "Is she allowing you to see them?" "We have an arrangement," Derek said. "It's fair." She made sure it was fair. Another silence. Longer this time. Vivian said. a single syllable carrying the weight of a woman reorganizing something she had spent years building in a particular direction. It was not an apology. Vivian Cox did not do apologies in the conventional sense, but it was something adjacent to one, the sound of a perspective quietly, reluctantly beginning to shift. Derek finished his coffee, looked at the yard, the oak tree in the corner that he had always meant to have pruned and never gotten around to. "I'll call you this week, Mama," he said. "Take care of yourself." He hung up. Stood in the morning sun for a while longer. The professional consequences arrived more slowly than Derek had expected, and then more thoroughly. The Mercer and Halloway meeting with Sonia's team had taken place the Thursday after the gala, Derek not in the room as he had suggested, and Mercer had ultimately agreed. He had received a summary afterward from Mercer's assistant. Exploratory, promising. No commitments yet, but a second meeting had been scheduled. The foundation was being careful. Of course it was. Patricia Wells was involved, which meant nothing moved faster than it should, and every term would be scrutinized with the thoroughness of someone who had spent 9 years protecting a $95 billion asset from people who wanted access to it for the wrong reasons. Derek understood without being told directly that his presence at the firm complicated things. Not impossibly, Sonia had been clear both at the gala and in every subsequent interaction that she was capable of separating the professional from the personal, but complicated. A variable that required management. He was the ex-husband of the woman they were trying to build a relationship with, and he had become that ex-husband in circumstances that were now known in outline, if not in detail, to everyone in his professional circle. The office had changed around him in the way offices do when something significant has shifted in the invisible hierarchy of a place, nothing said directly. Everything communicated through the small adjustments of who was copied on which emails, who sought his input in which meetings, which assignments landed on his desk, and which ones were quietly routed elsewhere. He was not being pushed out. He understood the difference, but he was being redistributed, returned in some sense to his actual dimensions, which turned out to be smaller than the ones he had occupied when he was the husband of Sonia Cox, and hadn't known what that meant. He started looking at other positions in March, quietly the way you do it when you're not yet ready to admit you're doing it. He updated his resume, had 2 conversations with a boutique firm in Chicago that was building out a new partnerships division. The work was interesting. The team seemed substantive. The city would mean a change in the custody arrangement, something to discuss with Howard and then with Sonia, and that conversation would require the kind of careful preparation he was only beginning to feel capable of. He was not running away. He told himself that every morning and most evenings, and believed it increasingly. He was simply recognizing at 39 that he had been living in a shape that didn't fit him, a shape built partly from borrowed confidence and partly from the proximity to a woman whose actual dimensions he had never bothered to learn. And now that the borrowed parts had been returned, what remained was smaller and more honest, and he was beginning to understand, capable of being rebuilt into something real. It was not a comfortable understanding. It was he was discovering the only one available to him. Marcus called him on a Wednesday evening, which was the weeknight dinner night, to say he had lost a tooth. Not lost it in the dental sense, lost it in the literal sense, which Marcus explained with great urgency and some distress because the tooth had come out at school and he had put it in his pocket, and then the pocket had apparently failed in its fundamental responsibility, and the tooth was now somewhere in the general vicinity of the school playground, or possibly the bus. And this was a significant problem because the tooth fairy Marcus had recently informed Sonia required the actual tooth as proof. Derek listened to this explanation in full, asked several clarifying questions, established that the tooth had definitely been in the left pocket of the gray pants, confirmed that the gray pants were currently in the laundry at Sonia's apartment, suggested they check the pocket before the pants went through the wash. He heard Marcus relay this suggestion, heard Sonia's voice in the background, the practical, unexcited voice she used for solvable problems, saying, "Yes, good idea, go check." A pause, running footsteps, distant rummaging. Then Marcus' triumphant, "It's in the pocket. Dad, it's there." Derek laughed. "The real kind, the kind that comes up before you've decided to let it." "Good man," he said. "Put it somewhere safe. Tooth fairy's coming." He heard Sonia in the background again say goodnight to Daddy. "Night, Dad," Marcus said, already moving on the way 6-year-olds move on, complete in the moment and then immediately elsewhere. "Night, buddy." The line went quiet. Derek sat in the kitchen of the house, his kitchen now technically, officially per the divorce agreement, and looked at the refrigerator, the space where his son's drawing used to be. He had found it in a box of the kids' things that Sonia had left for him, school papers, drawings, artwork from the last 2 years, sorted carefully into a folder with each child's name on the tab. He had taken Marcus's green crayon family portrait out of the folder and put it back on the refrigerator. It was still there. He looked at it now. 5 figures in green. Mom, tallest on the left. Dad, slightly apart on the right. The thing about building your whole identity around a woman you underestimated was that the collapse when it came was total and structural and left no part of the original construction intact. There was no version of the edifice that could be repaired and reoccupied. You had to build something new from the ground, using only the materials that had always actually belonged to you. Derek was beginning to understand what those materials were. They were smaller than he'd thought. They were also, he was discovering, genuinely his. The morning she chose. Spring came to the city the way it always did, not all at once, but in increments. A week of cold rain followed by 3 days of something warmer. Then cold again, as if the season needed to confirm its own intentions before committing. Then, finally, the particular morning that arrives every year when you step outside and the air is changed, in a way that isn't just temperature, something in it has shifted, opened, decided. Sonia noticed it on a Tuesday. She was up at 5:15 the way she was, always up at 5:15, the alarm more habit than necessity now. The apartment was quiet in the deep, particular way of a space where children were sleeping, a full, inhabited quiet, different in texture from the quiet of empty rooms. She could hear Marcus breathing through the monitor she still kept on the kitchen counter, even though he was 6 and didn't technically need it anymore. She kept it because she liked the sound, because it was the sound of him being safe and near and hers. She put the kettle on, stood at the window above the sink while it heated. The oak trees were fully green now. Had been for weeks, but this morning the light was hitting them differently. The early sun coming in at an angle that made the new leaves luminous, almost translucent the way young leaves are, before summer thickens them and darkens them into their mature selves. She stood and looked at it for a while. Just that. Just the trees and the light and the sound of the kettle beginning to think about boiling. She made her coffee, sat at the kitchen table, opened her laptop. The quarterly report was waiting in her inbox. Dr. Osei's team in Nairobi had submitted the revised figures on the hospital expansion, and the numbers were good. Better than good. The community governance structure was in place 3 weeks ahead of schedule, which meant the funding tranche could be released early, which meant construction could begin before the rainy season, rather than after, which meant the clinic would be operational by December, rather than the following March, 9 months earlier than projected. She read through the figures twice, made 2 notes in the margin of her own document, sent a reply to Dr. Osei that said in its entirety, "This is excellent work. Release approved. Let's talk Thursday." She closed that window, opened the next. The Manila team had a proposal for a girls' education initiative in 3 provinces, detailed well-researched, the product of 8 months of community consultation. She read it the way her father had taught her to read proposals first, for the vision, then for the numbers, then for the gap between the two, which was where the real work always lived. This one was solid. The gap was manageable. She flagged it for Patricia with a note, schedule a call with the Manila lead for next week. I want to move on this. She worked through the inbox steadily, not rushing, not watching the clock. This was her hour, the hour that belonged entirely to the work before the children woke up, and the day became what the day needed to be. She had protected this hour for 11 years through moves and marriages and losses, and the ordinary accumulating weight of a life lived at full capacity, and she intended to go on protecting it. At 6:40, she heard movement from Marcus's room. The specific sound of a 6-year-old attempting to be quiet, which bore no resemblance to actual quiet but was recognizable as the intention. She closed her laptop, got up, put bread in the toaster and took the orange juice from the refrigerator and got out the eggs. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:45, hair pressed flat on one side from sleeping, wearing the dinosaur pajamas he insisted were still appropriate despite having grown 2 inches since she bought them. He looked at her, looked at the stove. "Eggs," he said. "Eggs," she confirmed. He climbed onto his chair with the particular effort of someone performing an athletic feat and settled in with his elbows on the table, watched her cook with the attentive, evaluative expression he always wore in the morning, as if he needed to observe a few minutes of the world operating normally before he could fully commit to being in it. "Mom," he said. Is today a dad day or a home day?" "Home day," she said. "Dad day is Saturday." He considered this, nodded once satisfied, and relocated his attention to the window and the trees outside. Amara emerged at 7:10, fully dressed, backpack, already on spelling test words, written on her hand in purple marker, in a way Sonia had made peace with after the third time she'd tried to redirect it to index cards. Some systems worked and some systems were Amara's hand, and you chose your battles. They ate together at the kitchen table, eggs, toast, orange juice, the low-stakes morning conversation of a family unit that had found in the past several months its own new rhythm. Not the rhythm of before, a different one. Quieter in some ways, more honest in others. The rhythm of a household that knew what it was and had stopped performing what it wasn't. Amara talked about the spelling test with the focused intensity she brought to all academic events, which Derek had once and she had once both shared a private smile about across the kitchen table, and which Sonia now simply appreciated on its own terms. Marcus talked about a situation at recess involving a disputed rule in a game that he explained at length and with considerable passion, and that Sonia followed with genuine interest because the situation was in its way genuinely interesting, a question of fairness and precedent, and what happens when the rules of a game are unwritten and therefore subject to the interpretation of whoever is loudest. "What did you do?" she asked. "I said we should vote," Marcus said. "And say we voted, I lost?" A pause. "But it was fair because everyone got to say." Sonia looked at her son. "That's exactly right," she said. She walked them to school at 8, the 20-minute route that had become in the months since the move one of the fixed coordinates of her day. Down the oak tree street, left at the corner with the coffee cart right past the community garden that Marcus monitored with proprietary interest for signs of new growth, straight onto the school gates. She kissed Amara at the gate. Amara permitted this with the dignified tolerance of an 8-year-old who understood that some social contracts must be honored even when inconvenient. She crouched to Marcus's level and held his face in her hands for a moment, the way she had done since he was an infant, just looked at him completely, the way you look at something you love without reservation. "Have a good day, baby," she said. "You too, Mama," he said. Already turning. Already moving toward the door, and the day, and the world that was his to navigate. She watched them go through the gates. Stood for a moment on the pavement outside. The walk back was hers. She took it slowly, not the direct route, but the longer one through the community garden, and then along the small park that ran beside the creek. The morning was fully arrived now, the early light resolved into the clear, unhurried brightness of a spring day that intended to be warm. A woman was walking a dog. 2 men were sitting on a bench with coffee cups talking. A child was feeding ducks at the water's edge with the serene concentration of someone performing an important task. Sonia walked along the path beside the water and breathed the air and did not think about anything in particular. Let her mind be the way it rarely got to be during working hours, unstructured, receptive, moving at its own pace without agenda. She thought briefly about her father, about the morning he had sat her down. She was 19, home from her first year at university, and explained to her quietly and without drama what she would one day inherit and what it would mean and what it would require of her. She remembered the weight of that conversation, the way it had settled into her slowly over the years that followed, not all at once the way all true things settle. "The money is safest when no one knows where it lives," he had said, "and you are safest when no one knows what you carry." She had carried it for 15 years, had built it into something larger than he had left her, had protected it and grown it and used it imperfectly but genuinely in service of the things he had believed mattered. She thought he would have been pleased. She thought he would have had notes as well because he always had notes, but pleased first. Back at the apartment at 9:15. She made a second coffee, sat at the kitchen table, opened her laptop again. In the drawer beside the stove, she knew without looking were the things she kept near the school calendar, the pediatric appointment cards, her father's watch, the drawing in green crayon with its 5 figures and its careful labels, and at the bottom in her son's handwriting, "Mom is always there." She had not taken it out this morning. She didn't need to look at it to know it was there. Some things you carry without holding them. The laptop screen glowed. Outside the window, the oak trees moved in a light breeze, the new leaves catching the morning sun in the way young things catch light, which is entirely and without reservation. She put her hands on the keyboard, began. The work was good. The work had always been good. And the morning this morning, and all the mornings that were hers, now entirely and without apology, was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of noise. It was the quiet of a woman who had stopped explaining herself to people who hadn't asked the right questions. It was the quiet of someone who knew exactly what she was carrying and had decided a long time ago that it was enough. More than enough. It was hers. And she was finally, completely, unhurriedly, without performance or announcement, home. Strength isn't loud. It never was. I've been sitting with Sonia's story for a while now, and the thing I keep coming back to, it's not the $95 billion. It's not the gala or the courtroom or the moment Mercer shook her hand in front of Derek's face. It's the dish towel. The way she folded it in half and then in half again when she needed something to do with her hands so her face wouldn't say what her mind was thinking. That small, private act of self-possession in the middle of something that could have broken her open entirely. That's the lesson. Not be strong, that's too easy to say and too hard to explain. The lesson is know the difference between performing strength for people who are watching and actually being it quietly for yourself when no one is looking and the house is dark and you fold a dish towel instead of falling apart. Sonia didn't win because she was rich. She won because she had spent years building something real in that quiet office in those early mornings, in the patient accumulation of work that mattered, while the people around her were busy deciding who she was based on what she cooked for breakfast. Don't let people narrate your life based on the parts of it they've bothered to observe. If something in this story landed somewhere true for you, if you recognized a kitchen or a dish towel or a version of that particular silence, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what it was that hit. I read every one. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is your sign. There are more stories where this one came from. Stories about quiet women and the enormous things they carry, and what happens when the world finally catches up. Come back for the next one.